Welcome back, designers! In today's tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate to you how you can create a typographic portrait like the example seen on this screen. A typographic portrait is an image of a person that's made entirely out of words. We're going to be creating our typographic portrait by using an image of somebody that we love or who is significant to us as reference. Then, we're going to create custom brushes out of different words that describe the person. We're going to lay each of the brushes down on the different shadows that make up that person's contour. Finally, we're going to make the reference image invisible so that all we see in our final result is going to be the word brushes laid one on top of the other to make up the contours of the image. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. To get started, we're going to click New File on Photoshop. We're going to select the Print preset and select Tabloid as our blank document preset. Then we are going to name our document Typographic Portrait, and we're going to leave the dimensions of the document exactly as they are. You may or may not want to change the background contents from the default color, which is white, to a custom color. I selected a custom color because I felt like it made it easier for me to see my work as I progress through the portrait. You can click Custom and then it's going to open the color picker panel so you can select whatever color you'd like to see for your background. Having created this new document, I'm ready to open my reference file. I'm going to be using this image of my son eating ice cream at IKEA. The image is not particularly good. You can see it's a little bit blurry, it's not well lit, and the proportions are not perfect. But that's okay because I'm only going to be using this image as reference. You're not going to see the final image when I export my final draft. Here you can see me using the crop tool to get rid of some excess parts of the image. For example, I don't need his body, I just need his head and his shoulders basically. So I'm getting rid of the rest of his body and some parts of the background. Having done so, I'm going to be using my friend the Quick Selection tool, tool number 4, and I'm going to click Select Subject in the options bar. I'm doing this so that Photoshop is going to make an instant image selection of my son's face. Once I see the marching ants, I'm going to split my screen by going to Window, Arrange, and Tile Vertically. Then I'm going to use my Move tool and drag the image of my son over. Because the image is so small, I'm going to use Ctrl-T so that I can resize my image and make it fit. You can see that the image of my son's head is slightly cut off at the back, so I'm going to make sure that that area aligns with the edge of the document so it doesn't look like an imperfection. In other words, no parts of the body should look as if they're cut off. Having resized and positioned the image correctly, I am going to double click on the layer name and I'm going to call it Reference Photo. This will allow me to recognize what layer pertains to what in my overall design. Then I'm going to use the threshold adjustment destructively so I can convert my image from a three-dimensional photo to a black and white photocopy. You can find threshold by going to the image menu at the top of your workspace, selecting adjustments, and then threshold. You can see how I adjusted the threshold so I would have sufficient areas that were in black and sufficient areas that were white. I am going to be using this image as a reference, as I said. So I'm going to lower the opacity to 70% in my layers panel so that I can see what I'm doing a little bit clearer when I start adding typographic brushes on top. You can see that having adjusted the opacity to roughly between 70 and 60% makes the image more transparent. Then I'm going to create a brand new layer right above my reference photo. This is crucially important because you don't want to do all of the typographic brushes on the same layer. So click the plus sign at the bottom of your layers panel to create a new layer. Here you can see me creating a brand new document from scratch. The size of the document doesn't really matter because we're only going to be using this document to help create brand new typographic brushes. I'm using my type tool to write out different terms that relate to my son. So terms such as playful, smart, cute, adorable, anything that reminds me of my son and different qualities that he possesses. So you want to think about different terms that could relate to the person whose portrait you're doing. And you also want to think about different fonts that you can use that are going to help illustrate that person's personality. You can see that I'm using a stylized font for playful that makes it look like it's handwritten. After I'm done writing the word, I'm going to create a brush out of this word by going to the Edit menu at the top of my workspace and selecting Define Brush Preset. Here you can see me repeat the steps with a different term. So my different term is going to be preemie because my son was born premature at 7 months. I'm selecting a font that also looks like it was handwritten. Having selected an interesting font, I'm going back to the Edit menu at the top of my workspace. I'm selecting Define Brush Preset and I'm naming this brush to make it easier for me to locate later on as I'm working on the portrait. I'm going to repeat these steps several times so that I can think of 3 to 4 different terms that could describe my son and that I'm going to be using to fill his typographic portrait. Now that I'm done creating those typographic brushes, I'm ready to start using them. I'm going to make sure that I'm on the right layer that I labeled typographic brushes. This layer should be above your reference photo. And I'm going to be using my brush tool, tool number 9. And here you can see me expanding my brush picker so that I can properly locate my typographic brushes that I just created. They should be on the bottom of your default brush folders. So here you can see that I created 3 different typographic brushes. I'm going to start off with playful by making sure the color is set to black. And I'm going to start overlapping this brush over all the dark areas in the photo. So you can see that the hair is an obvious dark area, so I'm going to start out by placing this brush over the dark areas and basically working my way down from the top of the head to the neck area. I recommend that you do not drag when you're using typographic brushes. What that means is you are basically clicking one by one by one so that the brush is still legible. You can still see what that word actually says when you make your image layer invisible. You can see how I'm going and overlapping several of the different word brushes I created. So I'm using playful, I'm using preemie, I'm using cute, and so forth. And I'm adjusting the size as I go on to different areas in the image. So you can see me doing the eyes, doing the details in the ears as well as in the neck, and I'm making the brush smaller as I go so that I can see my progress. You'll also see me making the actual reference layer invisible from time to time so that I can see how much more work I have to do in helping to define the contours of my son's profile. To make your image reference layer invisible, all you have to do is click on the little eyeball icon next to the layer name so that you can see how much progress you've made on your typographic portrait. So having looked at the progress at this point in time, I can see that I need to expand different parts of the face so that I can work on making the brushes a little bit smaller and helping to define that little bit of eyebrow, eyes, and the little curve of the nose. I also noticed that the forehead and the nose, because it's white, kind of blends into the background when you turn off the reference image layer. So I'm going to be adding very small, minute brushes along the contours of the nose and the forehead so that it's a little bit easier for people to see where the face starts and where it ends. So you can see me panning down using my hand tool so that I can pan over different parts of the image and make sure that I'm filling each and every dark crevice with different brushes, just overlapping them one on top of the other. By this point in the portrait, I've already finished filling most of the dark areas with typographic brushes. So I'm ready to start cleaning up the edges of my image. To do so, I'm going to hold down Control and press on the thumbnail for my reference photo layer. This is going to create an instant selection. I'm going to click on my typographic brushes layer. I'm going to reverse my selection by going to Select, Inverse, and I'm going to hit Delete. It may not be as easily obvious to the naked eye, but what that's going to do is eliminate any stray pieces of brushes and make the contours of the image look a little bit cleaner. Then I'm ready to start adding some color. I'm going to click FX with my typographic brushes layer, and I'm either going to use a color overlay effect or a gradient overlay effect so that I can add some color to my portrait. You can see how I'm adding a gradient overlay to my typographic brushes layer to make it blend from an aqua green to a teal to a green. To give it a little bit more contrast, I'm changing the color of my background by selecting a solid color adjustment layer to place above the background layer and setting the color to a pale yellow. The great thing about using layer effects to add your color is that you can always add more brushes to your overall composition, and because the layer effects are non-destructive, you can always edit them later on if you decide that the color does not work for you. And the more brushes that I add, the color is going to change automatically with it. So you can see areas that I felt were a little bit deficient, and I started layering a few more brushes on top to fill those dark areas up. And the great thing about it is because that layer has the layer effect applied, all of the brushes that I'm now adding are going to be in the same gradient spectrum. In addition to the gradient overlay effect that I added for that brushes layer, I'm also adding an inner shadow effect to give the brushes a little bit more oomph, for lack of a better word, to make them look a little bit darker and a little bit more noticeable. You guys can go back and forth and adjust different areas of your portrait that you feel might be lacking and could use deeper shadows. To finish off the portrait, I'm using the type tool so that I can write my son's name at the bottom, and I'm ensuring that I'm using a similar font to that which I used in the typographic brushes elsewhere in the portraits. I'm also going to be copying the same layer effects of the same gradient overlay so that the text in his name mirrors that which is used to make up the portrait overall. Now that I'm done with my portrait, I'm ready to export my final draft by going to File, Export, and Export As. And I'm going to make sure that I select PNG as my format because I want to be able to share a high quality raster image file across several different platforms. So I want to be able to put it on my portfolio online. I want to be able to put it on my social media, and PNG is going to allow me to share that file easily with other people. And here is my final draft. I hope you guys found this tutorial helpful. Hit me up in the comments if you have any questions. Peace out.